Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. If I could have everyone's kind attention. Hope you've got a bottle of water in front of you, a cup of coffee or tea, and that you really enjoyed lunch as well out there. There was a sudden silence outside, and then I realized, well, everyone's checking out, so they've all gone to their rooms to pack. Well, that's what I did anyway. So it's very nice to have everybody back in the room, and this is our final stretch. So yeah, let's have all the ladies who are walking forward fill in the seats, and let's give our next presenter on our panel our full attention. I just want to remind everybody that Pigeonhole is obviously up and running, and these questions will be fielded by our panels. Also like to remind you about the survey. We'd really like for you to complete the survey if you haven't. We'd love to have your feedback. I don't know if they have a special section that says the MC moderator on stage, but just give me a gold star, guys, come on. Or half a star. But seriously, that's a good feedback that we really like from the entire room. Thank you very much. And of course, the hashtag once again is RBF Jakarta. It's been used pretty frequently, so please continue to, and if you have photographs, please put them onto Instagram or Twitter. Okay, thinking globally, why we need to change the way that we think about food. I'm very pleased to introduce on stage Jason Clay, the Senior Vice President, Markets and Executive Director, the Market Institute, WWF-US. Please, a big round of applause. And as Jason comes up here, he has said to me that he is very happy to answer all of your questions, as and when, after your presentation. If he is unable to answer all of your questions, he will do them within the next 24 hours. That's exactly what he said. So put those questions through on Pigeonhole. Jason, take it away.
Thank you. So I'm going to go pretty fast through these slides. We'll make this available as a PDF for anybody that wants it, and send your questions. There's also other published material to go with this. I was at a university graduation recently, and the speaker said something that I thought was quite striking. He said 80% of what the graduating class had learned was already obsolete. But how to learn would never be obsolete. And I think that's what we have to think about when we think about global food. The Oromo in Ethiopia have a saying, you can't wake a person who's pretending to sleep. So we also have to take our blinders off and see things that maybe are inconvenient or that we've been ignoring. And for World Wildlife Fund, what we have come to realize is that the fate of biodiversity, and in fact life on Earth itself, is going to be determined by where and how we produce food. It has the single most important impact on life on Earth. So today I want to talk about food, and here's why. In the next 40 years, we have to produce as much food as we have in the last 8,000. And that's not going to be easy. Food production is already the biggest threat on the planet of all human activities. It's responsible for more habitat loss, 70% of biodiversity loss. We use 70% of all the water used by people to produce food. We use more agrochemicals, more chemicals in food production than any other sector. It's responsible for more pollution than any other industry. It's responsible for about 30% of greenhouse gases all in. And it's responsible for the loss of about half of biodiversity, or excuse me, half of topsoil. So we've got to freeze the footprint of food. We have to figure out how to produce more with less. Today we have a little more than 7 billion people, and they consume 1 unit's worth of consumption each on average, for a total of 7 billion units of consumption. And that doesn't quite fit on the planet already. We're already using more planets than one. By 2050, we're going to have 9 billion people, and they're going to consume twice as much. And that's 18 billion units of consumption. To get those 18 billion units to fit on one planet, we're going to have to shrink the amount of resources, the land, the water, the other inputs that we use, by 62% per unit of consumption to fit on one planet. That's the challenge for the next 35 years. And we're going to have to do this at a speed and scale that has never before happened. It took the UK 155 years with 9 million people to double GDP. Took the US about 50-some years with 10 million people. It took China 12 years with more than 1 billion. It took India 17 years with 820 million. This is the speed of change today. It's much faster. China was 12 times the speed of Britain and 100 times the scale. China lifted 400 million people out of poverty in that 12 years, and that's a fantastic thing. That should be the goal of every government on the planet. But when you do that, it has implications for how many resources people consume. And we've been asleep at the wheel in terms of planning for that kind of growth, planning for success, if you will. So China doubled the GDP over 12 years, ending in 93. By 2005, people in China started to consume more. They had been saving. If you looked at the records of China during that period of 93 to 2005, they were buying gold. China bought about half of the world's gold in that period. Then they started buying consumer products, and that started affecting commodity prices. India doubled its GDP in 2006. They're also buying 25% of the world's gold today. What happens when they start buying commodities? What's going to happen to the world? And this is why I want to point this out. These are the price spikes from 2006, 8, 11. These yellow dots represent food riots where people died because of commodity prices. 23 countries had food riots where people died. This is going to become more common. So the issue going forward isn't what to think, it's how to think. How do we think about land and land related to food production? Today we use about 70% of all the land on the planet to produce food. About 5% is desert, 18% is mountains, lakes, rivers, and streams. 2% is in cities and infrastructure. About 12% is in national parks and protected areas. And that leaves about 23% that we could expand onto. But this 23% is actually where most biodiversity is today. But the point here is that we couldn't double from 40% of land to 80% of land even if we wanted to. So we've got to figure out how to intensify production and how to do it sustainably. We have to be more efficient, more with less. So by 2050, we have to double net food availability. And I say that because there's no silver bullet here. There's no one way we're going to do that. We need to focus on productivity. We need to focus on efficiency. Those are on the production side. But we also need to focus on waste and consumption. And I want to talk just a little bit about these issues. But here's the thing that I think we have to kind of ask ourselves. On a finite planet, should consumers have a choice about sustainable products? Or should the goal be that all the products on the shelf are more sustainable? Put another way, why should we pay more for sustainable products and less for unsustainable? Unsustainable products cost the planet. We need to start bringing the externalities, the environmental cost, the social cost of those products into pricing. Waste. Globally, we waste 1 out of 3 calories. That means that for every 2 calories we consume, there's 1 that's wasted. Waste equals 50% of our current consumption. Waste equals half of the new food we have to produce by 2050. Eliminating waste is the best production strategy for food. We don't have to produce more, we just have to save more. But waste is also 23% of all the water we use to produce food. Waste is 10% of all the greenhouse gas emissions because it's 1/3 of the total greenhouse gas emissions from food production. We also need to rebuild soils. I haven't really heard much about that at this conference, but I think if we want to stop the expansion of agriculture into frontiers and into new habitats, we need to rehabilitate the soils. We need to regenerate good soils, integrated lands. We should have a target, something like 250 million hectares by 2030. This is the Los Plateau after 20 years in China, 3 million hectares rehabilitated for production. Going forward, we need genetics. Without genetics, we'd still be hunters and gatherers. Improved planting varieties, improved animal husbandry, this has allowed us to produce more food. What's going to be acceptable in any country is going to differ. It's going to vary. But it's not a question of if genetics, it's a question of which genetics. And we have to be smart about that. Better practices are 100 times better than worse. Whether it's for corn or coffee or cocoa, rice, wheat, doesn't matter. But which is actually going to give us more food? Working with and recognizing the best producers, or actually moving the rest of production? There's been a lot of focus, a lot of effort on rewarding the best producers. If you give 1,000 producers the same practice, you'll get 1,000 results. So how do you actually move the bottom of the performance curve? And the reason I think this is so important is the bottom 25% of producers of any commodity produce 50% of the impacts and 10% of the product. And incidentally, they have about 75% of the malnourished and the stunted children as well. So if we want to improve the lot of the bottom 25%, we need to find ways to move them, to make them more efficient, or find them ways to make a different kind of living. Traded commodities. It's no accident that commodity trading systems were created about 150 years ago, where 1 ton of corn equaled 1 ton of corn produced anywhere in the world, or rice or sugar or whatever. It was all about physical properties. It's a very efficient trading system. The problem is, in the 21st century, we want commodity trading to tell us about intangible things, about organic or non-GM or smallholder or child labor, no deforestation, no slavery, etc. It's hard to tell that by looking at a bag of corn. So we have to bring those externalities, those intangibles into commodity trading and into the pricing of commodities. We don't want to lose the efficiency, but we've got to make commodities do more than they're doing today. And then there's climate change. Again, it's a topic that we haven't talked about much here. But let me just walk you through cocoa. These 2 countries in West Africa produced about 70% of the world's cocoa. This is the areas that are good for production today, if you will. And these are the areas that will be less good for production by 2030. 2030 is 14 years away. It's not a lifetime. It's very near. In the short term, climate-smart agriculture is going to be about efficiency. It's going to be about doing everything a little bit better and trying to really crank out the efficiency. In the medium term, it's going to be about changing crops, or changing genetics, or changing technologies. So, how do we take a crop like cocoa and rehabilitate it? One of the 11 arcs of deforestation on the planet today is with cocoa, and one of the places that that's happening is in West Africa. We also have aging plantations of cocoa and aging producers of cocoa. How can we turn this system around? Well, first of all, we need to get the government to step up and enforce the laws. Stop illegal deforestation, work to reduce and eliminate child labor, and then we need the private sector to begin to step in and provide long-term contracts, to provide 3-year grace periods for repayment where producers actually get a salary during the time when their new crops are growing. We've got to figure out ways to use the markets to change the commodity system. We haven't done that yet. And yet, we're not going to get money from governments to do this. We're not going to get money from foundations in the World Bank to do this. So we've got to figure out how to do it. We're actually designing a project to do this in Côte d'Ivoire, which is half the world's cocoa, using grafting as the new technology. One of the reasons that we have such an impact on the planet is animal protein. And there's only one form of animal protein that at scale has achieved the kind of efficiency we want to see across all of agriculture, and that's poultry. As you can see, what they've done is actually manage the issue of conversion of feed, mortalities, age to market, and the weight at the time of going to market. It's phenomenal. 20% of what it used to be on some of these categories, 4 times on other categories. But we were managing things that were physical attributes and things that had direct economic impacts. Today, you have to manage animal welfare. You have to manage space. You have to manage water. You have to manage chemicals. You have to manage medicines. We are going to require animal protein production to address a lot more issues than we ever have. Can we continue to be as efficient? How are we going to do that? These are the challenges that I think are going to be in front of us. And some of these systems of production are going to be easier to make more efficient than others. But the biggest thing we have to change is how we think. Producers can no longer think just about production, about tons of product produced. We have to be managing 2 or 3 or 4 different issues at the same time. So we want to move from maximizing production to optimizing several key efficiencies. The real question is, how do we take all the different efforts of many different NGOs, companies, governments, et cetera, to create pilot programs, to create starts of what might be more sustainable production, and take it from a niche to a norm? How do we make sustainability the new norm? The issue here, I think, is really about risk. It's both about the availability of products in the long term, and it's also about reputational risk. This little chart from S&P companies shows that 83% in 1975 of the value of a company was based on the physical assets that they owned. By 2009, it was only 19%. Now it's the reputation of that company. It's what people think about it. We're seeing moves in ways that we've never seen before. For example, the global salmon aquaculture industry, 17 CEOs joined together and decided to share all their information to reduce the impacts of production. Open source data, they realized that the reputation of the worst industry was equal to the reputation of the whole industry, the worst company, the whole industry. Ireland has done a similar thing, the first country to have a position that 100% of their food exports will be certified as sustainable by 2016. They're not going to achieve it, but they're going to get close. And they've got tens of thousands of producers that are sharing their data. They're looking at how they're doing versus their neighbors versus somebody halfway across the country, and they're beginning to improve performance more quickly that way. One of the issues that I'd like to leave with you today is that we're starting to do a lot of work on illegality. We've talked about transparency and traceability. What we found in our work is that between 5 and 50% of all traded commodities globally in the food sector are not produced legally in the country of origin. Let me just talk about how this looks in one particular instance. So let's talk about slavery in the fishing industry in Thailand. That industry provides small fish that are ground up and made into fish meal and fish oil to use for Thai shrimp feed. 90% of the feed contains fish that are produced from those boats. 20% of the imports in the US for the last 10 years of shrimp have come from Thailand. And what that means is that 1 in 5 shrimp consumed in the US was produced with slave labor. That's not an issue that's going to go away. That's an issue that has to be fixed. Those are the kinds of issues that the food system is going to be asked to address now that it hasn't been in the past. So we have a saying where I come from, if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. None of us can do all of this, but all of us can do some of this. And we all need to work faster and at scale and work together more if we're going to make it happen. Thank you.